All right, welcome everybody. Good evening. I'm very glad you're joining us for today's SDG lecture, where we will hear about sustainability, stability, and security in Africa, key findings in the Sahel from Dr. Maria Ayuk, who you can already see here next to me. I'm very glad we have you with us. Good evening. Hi, how are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Great, we're very much looking forward to your lecture. Just a few words before, I'm very happy to moderate this lecture tonight. My name is Ingo Nordmann. I am a research coordinator at the Development and Peace Foundation, or the SEF, as you might know the organization here in Bonn. And we also work on issues of climate and security. So we have some overlap with the CACIS in terms of research and content, and that's why I'm very happy to moderate today's session, where we will hear about the 3S initiative, which is the Sustainability, Stability, and Security Initiative in the Sahel region, which is trying to find new approaches to issues of security and sustainability. This initiative is kind of trying to think environmental or sustainability issues together with security issues and find innovative approaches. So we will hear today how that is going. And as we see in the headlines in the news just today and in the past days, the region of Sahel is still in turmoil and is dominating the headlines as we speak. The military coup in Burkina Faso has proven that there is definitely a need for action on the stability and security issues in the region. And this was not the only coup that happened, but also last year there were more in Mali, in Guinea, and in Chad. So this is a very timely discussion. And we're very happy that we have a real expert on the topic with us today, Dr. Ayuk. And also today, in exactly 3 weeks, a summit is starting between the African Union and the European Union, where security issues will certainly be on the agenda as well. So it's really a good timing for this lecture, Maria. So before I give the floor to you, I would just introduce you with a few words. So Dr. Ayuk is a postdoctoral researcher here at the CACIS. She's focused on peace and security issues in Africa. And she holds a PhD from the University of Leipzig here in Germany, which as a nice coincidence is where I did my master's as well, also on global studies. And where she's also already worked on peace building issues in Africa. Before that, Maria has also worked as a consultant with the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the Secretariat, which is based here in Bonn, and which also hosts the 3S initiative. And this is exactly the project that Maria also worked on a few years ago. So she is really an expert on the topic. And we are very much looking forward to hearing from her, hearing about her insights and how she assesses this initiative that was introduced in 2016. So it's been around for a few years, and we will hear what she thinks about it and what the current challenges and opportunities are. Maria will talk for about 35 to 40 minutes, I think, and afterwards we will have opportunity for questions and answers. So to ask questions, please use the Q&A or F&A function here, which you see on the bottom bar just below, just next to the chat. And then we will pick up your questions in the second part of the lecture. So without further ado, I would hand the floor to Maria. Please, the floor is yours. Looking forward to your input. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingo, for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. Today, I will discuss some key findings of my research on sustainability, stability, and security in Africa. My presentation is divided into 5 parts. First, I will present the research questions, followed by a snapshot of the Sahel region. Later, I will talk about the initiative on sustainability, stability, and security in Africa as a response model. Also, I will present the key findings and conclude with some critical avenues for future research. Next slide. The research addresses three key questions. And first, it seeks to ask why, despite heavy capital injections in the intervention models, such as the sustainability, stability, and security in Africa, which is known as the 3S initiative, and Africa-Europe relations, among others, have not paid climate security dividends in Sahel region. I would also want to address the question of how appropriate is the 3S intervention model in addressing climate change, migration, and security, especially in the context when the situation is out of control in the Sahel. And lastly, I will address the question of how can the Africa-EU negotiations on these climate security issues transform extractive institutions without reducing the benefits of the political elites. Next, yeah. Actually, in the Sahel, stability and security are directly linked to sustainability. So this is the map of the Sahel. We can see that the Sahel region actually encompasses 10 countries between the Atlantic coast and the Red Sea. And 4 of these countries actually border the Lake Chad region, and including Cameroon, Chad, Niger, and Nigeria. And while other 6 countries are Burkina Faso and the Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Mauritania, and Senegal, as shown on the map. And next slide, please. Yeah, so the Sahel is actually a 500 kilometer huge semi-arid region of Africa, which is between the Sahara Desert to the north and tropical savannas to the south. And it has about 300 million people, with 90 million reliant on fuel for cooking and more than 65 million people with no access to electricity. And the region is one of the poorest, least developed, but with the world's most youthful population. According to population statistics, it shows that almost 65% of the population of the Sahel is below 25 years. And this kind of youth boom will exponentially increase the demand for food, energy, water, land, and natural resources. Inevitably, massive demographic changes are also occurring in the Sahel, and the population is growing at about 3.5% per year, and it is expected to reach about 340 million in 2050. So essentially, massive demographic shifts in the Sahel rural areas are driving migration trends, conflict, instability, and insecurity. And most of these rural communities actually depend on rain-fed agriculture for food security, income generation, and also poverty reduction. And in the Sahel, about 95% of the food production is based on rain-fed agriculture. And we see this, that is particularly crop and animal husbandry. And there is kind of a gender gap in the Sahel, where women provide actually 80% of the agricultural labor force and play a very critical role in the farming sector in providing food security and resilience to their households and communities. The economy is also very heavily relies on other primary commodities like fossil fuel, resources including crude oil, natural gas, and coal. And next slide. And the region is actually a hotspot for climate change, migration, and insecurity. And climate change has been identified as a threat multiplier, an accelerant of migration and instability and insecurity risks, which is actually exacerbating existing challenges. It is affected more than the most, this region, with temperatures that is rising 1.5 times the global average. And the region actually faces increasing variable rainfall and more frequent droughts, floods, desertification, and degradation processes. because of these extreme climatic changes, they have contributed actually to decrease to decreases in agricultural productivity, as well as driving pressures on the supply of fresh water and fertile land. Extreme heat weather events are also increasing aridity and changes in rainfall, exposing the region to climate-related security risk. Statistics from the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, that is the UNCCD, indicates that between 2012 and 2020, about 18 million people were affected by droughts in the Sahel. Further statistics show that about 25%, 45% of agricultural land is affected by desertification, and 55% is at high risk, very high risk of degradation. And also about 280 million tons of cereal crops are lost each year in this region. So we see that climate change is actually shifting geopolitical dynamics. For example, in the Lake Chad Basin, climate change contributes to framing the security and development context. And climate change has actually amplified livelihoods insecurity and social tensions. Next slide. Climate change also is increasing incidences of natural resource conflicts and recruitment into armed groups, that have been triggered by this growing livelihood insecurity. We've seen cases of conflicts, for example, between farmers and pastoralists that are competing over land for grazing of their animals. And this has also resulted in insurgent groups like Boko Haram and Islamic State West Africa taking control of the Lake Chad basin to secure scarce resources, resulting in violence. Next. Due to, no, please back, yeah. So due to such violence, many people have been forced to move to other parts of the region or internationally. And according to estimates from the UN, armed groups carried out more than 800 deadly attacks alone in 2021. Also, data from the World Bank shows that climate change might force about 86 million people in Africa to migrate within their own countries by 2025. And there have been a very huge increase in internal displacement, and since 2013, going from 217,000 up to 2.5 million in 2021. And the number of refugees in the Central Sahel countries such as Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger also stands now at about 410,000. So data has also shown that from 2014 to 2016, about 330,000 people through Agadez per year attempted irregular journeys north. And as a result of the European migration policy, however, which is based on externalization of their borders, in 2016, migration flows through Agadez actually dropped from this 330,000 to 70,000 per year. Thus, we observe that all of these multiple issues or mega trends overlap and intersect to produce a very turbulent Sahel region. Next slide. Against this backdrop, concerned by the vicious effects of climate change, particularly on migration, on fragility and instability in communities, Senegal and Morocco launched the Initiative on Sustainability, Stability and Security in Africa that it's usually called as a 3S initiative at the COP22 in Marrakesh. And on 16th of November, 2016, at the first African Summit in Marrakesh, African political leaders actually endorsed the initiative as a constructive way to address the continent's demanding security, stability, and sustainability challenges. The 3S initiative is an intergovernmental initiative that aims to present an African perspective on migration and instability linked to natural resources. The primary goal is actually to address the underlying conditions that force people to migrate, that also trigger conflicts and also increases exposure to extremist groups, including, for example, acute land scarcity, rural unemployment, tenure insecurity, and competition for natural resources. The initiative actually intended to create 2 million green jobs for vulnerable groups of people, including young people, displaced populations, and individuals that are targeted by extremist groups in the region. And furthermore, the 3S initiative promotes investment opportunities in the restoration and sustainable land management of 10 million hectares of lands by 2025. So the idea is that by 2050, 10 million hectares of land must have been restored from degradation. Next slide, please. The 3S initiative is one of the pillars of the Great Green Wall Accelerator, and the Sahel countries that are members of the 3S are that we see include Benin, Burkina Faso, Central African Republic, Chad, the Gambia, Ghana, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, except for Morocco, because it is a transit route via Europe. But although Morocco is situated in the north of Africa, but actually it is part of the initiative because of the strategic position that it holds with migratory route. And however, this initiative is very ambitious, and to achieve these ambitious goals, the 3S initiative also works to promote partnership between its African member states first, then the European Union and the international community, particularly international organizations. Next slide. So the initiative is led by a task force, which is composed of the countries that I mentioned above, and it is co-chaired by the Kingdom of Morocco and the Republic of Senegal. And each country is represented by senior officials that are directly appointed by the heads of government. And the Secretariat of the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification has been entrusted as the secretariat of the task force. So the task force guides and promotes the initiative by putting forward crucial elements of the 3S approach in key African and international processes, including, for example, the Global Compact on Migration, Global Forum on Migration and Development, the New Partnership for Africa, and African Union, as well as the Tana Security Forum, which is kind of a security model forum held in Africa. And the task force also coordinates efforts to mobilize the necessary expertise and financial resources for project implementation. And in terms of implementation, when this initiative started in 2016, this demonstration project was initiated, and Agadez, Niger was chosen as the demonstration site for the first project. And the reason is because, why Agadez is because more than I think 100,000 migrants transited from the region in 2016. And the project actually envisaged to restore at least 470 hectares of degraded land, and also try to create land-based jobs for unemployed youths, returning migrants, and also former smugglers in that region. And in this regard, I would like to say that the 3S response model is very crucial in understanding European-African relations, as it fosters kind of a dialogue, negotiation, and support regarding these mega trends in the Sahel region. Next slide. What then are my research findings? Research findings have revealed actually three crucial militating factors. And the first is extractive political institutions. In the Sahel, politics is seen as the rule of the game, and politics also govern incentives in terms of who gets what and who should wield power. And African leaders have created political institutions to consolidate and sustain power. And these extractive political institutions are actually scared of creative destruction, replacing the old. That is, they're scared of replacing old institutions with new ones. And the Africa EU dialogue is actually a threat to the political economy of African leaders. The observation is that the 3S initiative won't take the same speed as expected by the EU, or if it is implemented, it won't be sustained because the African leaders will actually dominate or control, are afraid of creative destruction. And in terms of creative destruction, it entails that coming up with new and innovative ideas. However, the tendency of innovation is that it actually destabilizes already established power and economic relations. And the elites fear this and they will actually resist it. And in such a scenario, the 3S is likely to be short-lived. And further findings also show that extractive political institutions have deliberately created extractive economic institutions to transfer power and wealth into the hands of African leaders. And these findings show that both African and European political actors prioritized security in the dialogue on security. However, what is very interesting is that although both stakeholders or actors prioritize security on their agenda or in their dialogue on 3S issues, the understanding of security actually differs remarkably. And for the Africans, or the Africans understand security from a state-centric traditional perspective. This understanding is very, very minimalistic because they are more concerned about the pressing emergencies in the country, particularly threats to their sovereignty and power. And in contrast, the European conception of security is actually framed or influenced by their foreign policy that perceives both traditional, that is hard security, and human security issues. And this divergence of conceptualization on security has actually impacted on the outcome of negotiations, as more strategies were geared more towards counterterrorism. Next slide. So the second finding shows that extractive economic institutions are structured actually to extract resources from many by few elites, in that power and wealth are concentrated in the hands of most African leaders, and what is left usually is forced on the people. So the crumbs are always left for the people to fight over. And it is essential to highlight that extractive political institutions actually support these extractive economic institutions to cement the power of the political elites who benefit from the extraction seen through neo-patrimonialism and rents, and also the rent-seeking nature of these elites. And consistent with the rent-seeking behavior, the political elites will double as the same time as economic elites are happy to extract sub-oil resources without creating space for other economic activities. And these elites also neglect investment in public amenities, just like they do for climate adaptability or for climate security. And because of rent-seeking behavior also, these economic institutions in the Sahel are not inclusive. So basically they kill talents, they also kill skills and choices as they do not create space for people to innovate and invest, which are central features of climate security or the 3S initiative. There is a euphorism that the cow eats where it is tethered, and hence the looting and gorging of resources. And we see that in this case, elites will always kind of expropriate foreign investment, such as those from the 3S initiative, investment on security, investment on climate change, and also investment on migration. And further results show that there is also kind of a considerable divide between Africa and the European Union, especially on the debate on climate change. And African leaders have argued that they still need to benefit from fossil fuel resources. And although they are the hardest hit by climate change, which is something that is very interesting. And the argument is actually related to the fact that their economies survive on such resource rents or such rents from resources. And cutting down fossil fuel will mean that it will crush their economies, it will risk fragility and also rebels and rebellion possibilities. And furthermore, the African political leaders, according to them, that fossil fuel is central in powering the growth of the region. For example, we will see that they stated to show how these fossil fuel actually is crucial in their economies, is that about 6% of the sub-Saharan the countries, Sahel countries, account for about 6% of sub-Saharan Africa's gross domestic product, which excluding South Africa in this case. Thus, we observe that resource incentives actually buy peace, especially by checkering and rebalancing rebels and also rebellion, which the EU actually overlooks. This is something that I think is very critical, that the EU overlooks, that actually resources buy peace in the Sahel. And the Africans also argued that they want to have both rents from fossil fuel and also development finances, which is meant to tackle climate change and also to reduce energy poverty. And the observation is that it will be impossible to realize climate security because the West's intervention strategies will crush the leaders' ranks. For instance, neo-patrimonial practices will resist transitioning from fossil fuels to clean renewable energy. And why is this? Why is it like that? Why would they resist this? It's because of two reasons. The first one is that to secure rents that will assist in coup-proofing, to consolidate and sustain power. And the second reason is that fossil fuel rents actually support a rentier economy, since most of African countries heavily rely on hydrocarbon subsoil resources that I mentioned already, crude oil, coal, and gas for survival. We've also seen previously where good opportunities to use aid have been blown away. For example, a concrete example that I realized is that finances that were paid by the EU for repatriated refugees meant for startups were being misdirected. And other cases recently, like the resources for the 3S, we've seen with the COVID also that finances too have been looted and converted into rents. And there is something that I also find very interesting, is that the Africans leaders have called for at least a double adaptation finance by 2025. And their commitment to preventing deforestation, peatlands, and Congo Basin with a pledge of 1.5 million without accepting a ban on fossil fuel usage is very, very suspicious. And although the Sahel share different histories economic structures and identities of political elites. What is consistent in this region is the existence of extractive institutions and the intrinsic relationship between extractive economic and extractive political institutions that reinforces this kind of strong feedback loop. For instance, findings show that political institutions allow African leaders who control the political power to choose economic institutions that enrich them. In turn, these economic institutions also give wealth and power that will help them to consolidate a political elite's control. And also a good example is that the rents that the economic institutions generate have enabled these political leaders to build up kind of security armies, what some authors have called ethnic security or ethnic military, and such as army, police, gendarmeries, private security, mercenaries, and sometimes they even rig elections and also buy judges during elections. Next slide. Yeah, so lastly, the last finding is that on policy failure. I would say that further evidence in the research on sustainability, stability, and security shows that policy failure in the intervention strategies in terms of the 3S response model, as well as the EU-Africa dialogue. And findings show that the extractive institutions that are both political and economic are major push factors of migration. And they have actually pressured Sahelians to have a mass exodus to other countries and move all over the region as well as overseas. And of course, we can blame leadership issues and other policy failures that trigger such movements. Also, results show that there is kind of a significant policy gap in the debate on migration between EU and Africa. And because migration management has actually centered or focused on economic and development challenges. And also African political leaders, for example, their conceptualization or understanding of migration is not directly linked as a security, as a threat, but rather to strengthen the regional free movement or the free movement of people in the region. For example, like we see examples of the ECOWAS free movement protocol. And also they also see migration as a way to promote trade within the region, particularly the Africa continental free trade that was just introduced. And due to this policy gap, there are no concerted efforts at the global level to address climate change. And results have proven that migration and climate fragility, because there is no concerted effort at the global level, therefore migration and fragility will not stop unless these institutions are transformed or reformed. And also because the political elites have to feel secure first to create space for creative destruction, and also technological change, which is necessary for climate security. Next step. Yeah, so to conclude, I think that extractive institutions will persist if interventions are not strategic and inclusive. And there are now, because why do I say this? Because there are a lot of forces that are fighting to control these extractive institutions. I already mentioned them in the beginning. And because there are a lot of forces, the question is how then will the vicious cycle be broken, especially if 3S is not inclusive? Possibly a broad coalition of global powers that fight regimes in the Sahel might be helpful to do this. And Another remark is that the extractive institutions are strong enough to ward off interventions or other forms of trade. And as such, the intensity of this extractiveness varies among Sahel countries. Yet, 3S seems to be kind of a blanket and universal model of intervention. And since the 3S is a universal model, dialogue is therefore needed. Inclusive dialogue or genuine dialogue is needed. And in this case, it will be necessary for future research to focus on, look at how, for example, or answer the questions, how can 3S transform these institutions without reducing the benefits of the political elites? And also, I think that it will also be good for future research to look how sure that the EU is not promoting extractive politics and economic institutions by supporting and financing African leaders. Thank you very much for your kind attention and the opportunity to engage with you today.
Well, thank you very much, Maria, for this insightful lecture. It was certainly interesting to get your perspective on this, and I've certainly learned a lot, even if I have discussed with you a little bit about the topics before. It was still good to hear all of this in this coherent way. So thank you so much. We have one question here in the Q&A function, which I will just read for everyone. Thank you for the very interesting talk, Maria. Do you have solutions you can suggest? The million-dollar question. Whose responsibility is it in the end? Since so far not enough has been done, and actually, au contraire, we had the refugee crisis in Europe in 2015. So, Maria, do you have any solutions you can suggest? And yeah, can you say something about the responsibilities of the involved actors?
That's quite, thank you very much for the question. And I think that it's a very interesting question. I think the solution is that we kind of, how do we address the policy and analysis mistakes that is often made in the Sahel region? That is the first step that I suggest or that I would think to say. And then the other issue that I would say the who part of it is that that one of the reasons why the EU, that this dialogue hasn't really been successful is that it doesn't include the people that are actually suffering from all of this or being affected by all of these issues. So indigenous integrated approach is very important. So which means that everyone is included to look for a solution, and it shouldn't be always a top-down kind of solution. It should as well include bottom-up solutions. And the other question, please. What is the other question? The second part of the question.
Well, it was, do you have solutions you can suggest, and whose responsibility is it in the end? Since so far not enough has been done, but I think you've addressed that.
Yeah, and another, thank you very much, Ingo. I think another solution is that Europe does not listen. That is my personal observation, and also what is coming in from the data. What is important to note is that Africans are very aware of the threats that they face, and they also know, they are aware of the solutions that that they can use to address such threats or mega trends that they encounter. However, there is need actually to listen, to learn more and listen to the Africans. And it shouldn't be about talking about Africa, but it should be about talking with the Africans. And what does this imply? It implies that it will be good to include African point of views in all considerations, like talk with Africa and not about Africa, give experts of Africa and scientists of Africa to share their views. And this is kind of an interdisciplinary approach that I feel that it's going to work. And which we need to consider is the one thing that I find also very significant is the fact that Europe is no longer the partner of choice for Africa. So there is kind of diversification of partners, especially when we look at the involvement of China and Russia in the Sahel. Inclusive dialogue is very important, or genuine dialogue. So dialogue that involves putting the interests of all the parties involved, both Europe and Africa, on the negotiation table, and also trying to understand how these African systems actually work, because there is a lack of understanding from the European side on what what the geopolitics or the domestic political economy of Africa is. So, and which is what I already mentioned, that the Europeans do not understand that in Africa, fossil fuel resources, for example, like crude oil, actually buys peace and stability or peace building in Africa. We've seen cases in Africa, for example, like Nigeria, where the government and the rebels had to sit together and negotiate on how to share the resources of these resources. So it's very important that Europe tries to understand these dynamics rather than importing strategies or replicating projects and initiatives that actually do not achieve at the end of the day. It instead worsens issues because it serves as avenues for the extractive tendencies or rent-seeking nature of these African political leaders to make money, because I must say that they are very smart. They understand the threats and also understand the solutions, but they choose what kind of solution is more pressing for them to address rather than Europe telling them what the solution is to them.
Right, thanks for addressing that, because I think with that you have also addressed the little addition that Selina gave to her question, which was maybe also which solutions can be thought in various perspectives. So I think you have addressed the different perspectives, or do you want to add on that last part of that question?
I don't think so. Just to emphasize that the key solutions would actually be to understand these extractive institutions, how they interplay into every aspect in Africa, how they frame and intersect, overlap with security, with climate change, with migration. And so it's very critical because they are very critical to achieving these. Yeah, it may sound a little bit kind of absurd for the Europeans, but that is the reality. Understanding what the reality on the ground is different from an outsider. So as an outsider, you need to understand how the people think, you know, how the people behave and how politics is run in that particular area. You can't just come and then you want to inject your own politics, and it doesn't work. So that's my takeaway would be that research or policy and so on mistakes have to be corrected. There are a lot of policy mistakes that have been made in the Sahel, and these policy mistakes have to be corrected. And starting from understanding the political, these extractive political and extractive economic institutions and how they function and also shape issues in the Sahel.
Right, thank you. And I think that will include some hard lessons for Europeans in the future, which are probably long overdue. So the next question, I will just keep it as it is, because it is formulated in such a direct way that I don't want to add anything to it. What does it tell us when, for example, cattle herders are turning into jihadists? I'll give that one to you, Maria.
Yeah, that is a very, I think this is a very, very interesting observation or question that security providers or EU Africa, they tend to ignore. If we take an example like in Mali, we saw how farmers have actually abandoned farming, and they have become, they have joined extremist groups. Also, the same thing is happening in Nigeria, in Burkina Faso. In short, in the Sahel region, this is becoming famous. We need, I think that this reason still goes back to the extractiveness that I was talking about, how these governance issues, you know, lack of opportunities, they are actually, they are driving the desire for people to join, because extremist groups actually provide avenue for these people to make money. So it shows that in the Sahel, the extractive institutions, be in political or economic, they are also, although they are formal, like the ones I've spoken, they are in the formal scenario, they are also informal institutions that we are talking now about. Extremist groups, they kind of attract, you know, so people see this as an option, because politics is not working well and the economics also is not working well. So this politics and economics, they kind of produce a kind of hybrid in the Sahel, that people, young people in particular, will have to abandon farming, which is has been a key sector for the Sahelians. Also, because climate change is not giving them any alternative. So it's easier for them if the lands are drying, there is no water, there is no food security. What do you expect? People who join groups that will be able to produce them finances, or they can also get rents from this. So I think that is a very interesting question, and also interesting observation. It is not only people, but even women. We've seen cases where women are also joining extremist groups, because women are the key actors in Sahel in terms of agricultural sector. And because this sector is no longer productive for them, so they have to look for alternative sources of income, and extremism becomes one of such sources that they can generate income and also sustain their families. So that is kind of an understanding that needs to be addressed, that we must address the pressing issues, as well as we must address not only the security issues, but there is need for kind of a holistic approach in the Sahel, which incorporates security as well as development issues, but not only the security focus and then ignoring the other aspects. Therefore, what I'm trying to say is that both climate change, migration, and security has to be handled at the same level. One must not be heavier than the other, or one must not weigh. So it must be kind of a simultaneous way of addressing the issues, because what I've seen with especially with the 3S, is that priority is given to certain aspects, especially security, than other aspects that like climate change and also migration, which of course they are at the same level in terms of risk or mega trends in the Sahel.
Yeah, thank you. Again, we are forced to change some of our preconceived ideas about how to tackle, for example, like in counterterrorism issues. I remember actually from one of our meetings when we discussed the topic about the lecture, it also came up, why would rural population join a terrorist group? And you said, well, this is just something that I remember from our conversation. You said, well, the first question is, would they consider this organization that they are joining, would they consider it terrorist? And I guess your answer would be, in most cases, no, because they are just, you know, they're not seeing it as such. And this is why counter-terrorist measures that are then externally attempted will, have very little promise for success, I guess.
Yeah, what is also very important, thank you very much, Ingo, for that observation. What is also important is that we should be very careful with the construction of terrorism. It's been challenged over time, especially in the Sahel region. We've seen a kind of a progressive undemocratic or authoritarianism in the Sahel that is coming up. And oftentimes these rebels or people that protest against the government and so on and so forth have been labeled as mislabeled or as rebels, but in reality that is not, or I mean terrorists, not rebels. So these rebels have been labeled as terrorists. I do not disagree that there is no terrorism, but we should be very careful because of this extractive political nature of these African leaders. Sometimes they take normal public dissent as oh, they are terrorists. And once they call them terrorists, this calls for international attraction and also calls for financing. Whereas in these communities, for example, when I did my interviews with a lot of people, I have a friend that the brother actually joined Daesh, ISIS, and one of the most revealing finding is that he never joined this, got affiliated to this group as something that was bad or terrorist per se. He got into it because it would provide employment opportunities for him, and also because they are fighting, in quotes, they are fighting Western structures that have disenfranchised them, that have impoverished them. And these Western structures might not necessarily relate to the EU per se, but they are structures that African institutions have inherited, you know. So these African institutions they are inflicting poverty to them. And the idea is they see these terrorist groups as something attractive. They see them as even, how do you say, role models in their communities, you know. So we should be very careful. And I do agree with you that at times the construction from the local population is very different from what comes from the West, or what is usually conceived internationally. And that is a very, very important observation to make or highlight.
Right, thank you very much for elaborating on that. And I think these Western structures seen as problematic is something that now plays a role in Burkina Faso and in the other nations where, yeah, former French colonial structures seem to be still prevalent. And this is something that we will come back to later in the last question that has been submitted. But first, let's go back to a potential solution or a suggestion or an idea that Wolfgang has here put in the chat. He said, I appreciate your presentation very much. You appear to say that environmental protection in the Sahel is prevented by elites relying on fossil fuels. So now the suggestion, why would elites not consider extracting more environmentally friendly resources like solar energy power? And what prevents them from switching to these resources? So if elites want to keep extracting, why can't they change from fossil fuels to renewables? That is a yeah, an interesting take, and I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I think I already addressed this in my presentation, where I mentioned that they would not want to. Not that they don't want to transition, they don't want the desire, because actually fossil fuels, they're making the claim that they have not benefited a lot. And most African economies actually rely on these fossil fuels because that is where they get rents from. For example, let's take, if I take an example in Nigeria, the revenue of Nigeria, about 80% comes from crude oil production, exploitation. So imagine that you eliminate crude oil production in Nigeria or exploitation in Nigeria, and then you can think of what is going to become of. And another thing is that because of this crude oil production, it has created a lot of instability and insecurity within Nigeria, where we've had thousands, several different armed groups coming up, you know. So the idea is that fossil fuel resources actually buy peace. And that is something that the Europeans should understand. And the question I would rather ask is that I have asked earlier is that how can we actually transform these institutions, but we still maintain that these elites actually benefit from such institutions? It's something that sounds paradoxical, but it's something that needs to be considered. Of course, there could be a kind of time to cut fossil fuel, which is what Africans are saying. They are saying that, oh, Europe is playing double standard because number one, Europe has benefited or is where it is today because of the benefits that they got from fossil fuel. And even in Europe, we see kind of a contradiction or divide in Europe between the public sector and even the private sector. The policymakers in Europe are saying zero emission, we cut 100% fossil fuel, but the private sector is also pushing. It's like, no, because they're making money, profiting from it. And this contradiction is further strengthened by the fact that we also see the fact that even though Europe is pushing, politicians are pushing, the European Union is pushing for zero production or of fossil fuels, their economies still rely on fossil fuel. Europe relies heavily on gas. And that is the argument of the Africans and even the Chinese, if I would say, like, the best way for them to the Europeans is that they would stop financing or mining of fossil fuel. But actually, I see this as kind of a contradictory approach, and for the Africans, they can actually finance, get money from fossil fuel, as well as get money for renewable energy. So it's kind of something that needs to be considered. And also another thing that I would like to say is that the first thing is European economies are very diversified, but the African economies are not diversified. So reasons why they rely heavily on primary commodities, because it generates rents. So if you cut an economy that is not diversified, that is relying on one kind of commodity, it means that you are tampering on the rents that they are given, and that is going to be chaos. So there is I think need for kind of see how maybe with time, gradually take time to cut fossil fuels, and also see how to diversify these economies. So diversification of the economies will first of all be a starting point, but to say they should cut fossil fuel like abruptly, it's not going to work, and it will be a very big challenge for Sahel countries.
Right, thank you very much. So if we turn our view now to the current situation in the Sahel and the military coup that has, for example, now happened in Burkina Faso just on Monday, where the military has taken power, apparently from what I hear from, well, admittedly Western media mostly, is very much, well, largely supported by the population. They have deposed of the president. So if we look at these coups, and as I mentioned in my introduction, there were coups also in Guinea in the past year, also in Mali twice actually, and also in Chad there has been a non-democratic transition of power. So if we look at that situation, this is what the next question is aiming at. How impactful do you estimate this series of coups in Western Africa on comprehensive challenges of cooperation like climate change? Are they a threat, and are we back to the starting point, Maria?
I think, yes, that coups are a threat in the region. And I also think that there are kind of new forms of governmental reforms so far, or changes in the Sahel. And the impact that I see in these, especially with Burkina Faso, is that there is this kind of vicious cycle of violence that will continue. You cited already cases in Mali, for example, in 2020 had two coup d'etats within a year. Guinea also had a coup d'etat, even Chad and so on. And now we have Burkina. Actually, within 2 weeks, Burkina has also this year, they had the first attempted coup, and now they actually succeeded with the coup d'etat. So it is kind of a consistent way of political change in the Sahel. And I find it very dangerous in terms of peace and security in the region. And the reasons why the population is citing, for example, the case in Burkina Faso, is because these institutions that I mentioned, the extractive institutions and extractive economic institutions, they are not delivering. And if they are not delivering, people want change. You know, people want change in the Sahel, especially young people. There is this aspiration that they want to be like in Europe. People want to have the same needs. People want to have the same iPhone, wear Adidas, and so on and so forth, like people in Europe. They believe that they also require, they need it, or they merit, or there is the need that they can benefit from such resources that the elites are actually sharing among their clients or their groups or their friends, as well as families and so on and so forth. So what I see is kind of, which is dangerous, because there is a need, I have to highlight something. The ECOWAS is a very strategic actor in this region, and the ECOWAS has been very strategic, especially in peace building issues and even peacekeeping missions. But the consistency of such coups and it makes it this region very, very fragile, and even poses a very huge challenge for the ECOWAS. Take, for example, we are talking about already these countries we are citing, they form what the Europeans call, they are mostly French, African per se countries, and they form what we call the G5 du Sahel, G5 Sahel countries. Out of these G5 Sahel countries, or out of these Sahelian countries, we already have 4 countries that constantly there is it's them, the possibility of them forming a coalition to even produce more dangerous security threats is very possible in the region. And that is something that the EU has to be mindful about it. And also the fact that there have been sanctions from the ECOWAS, there have been sanctions from France, but like I mentioned, that these people actually know what they want. They don't care, because they have alternatives. Why France is sanctioning and ECOWAS is sanctioning, they are inviting Russia, they are inviting China is coming in, and so that is really, this complexity is really something that we have to be careful, and I see it very dangerous for the Sahel region, coupled with environmental changes and also migration. So we see that further migration will increase, and also because of this kind of turbulent environment, people will be forced to move. And when people are forced to move, they abandon fertile lands. And if those lands are not cultivated, what happens to it? So it's a vicious cycle on my side. It's actually a very vicious cycle and has a very huge implication for peace and security in the region. The kind of coups that are taking, coup d'etats that are taking place frequently in the Sahel, it's also a signal for change, that young people desire economic opportunities, young people desire jobs. The governance is failing because political leaders, when they come to power, they use democratic means to come to power through elections, and so, but after being elected, they become undemocratic. So they either steal votes during elections, at times, what they even do is they are very repressive. You know, any genuine dissent or whatever, they clamp down on such voices, and so limit space for civil society, limit spaces for freedom of speech, and so on and so forth. So these are very complex issues that needs to be handled with care. And I see that the issues, that's why I say the issues in the Sahel will not stop, except there is kind of a strategic and inclusive dialogue in the Sahel that considers all actors in all sectors. So it should be both top-down and bottom-up approach. It shouldn't only be one-sided. It should be very inclusive and very holistic. That is my thinking or my point of view.
Right, and it makes you question again if we look at the role of the EU, which I would briefly like to come back to, it is very questionable if support for these governments in question that are constantly toppled and then reformed. So there's not a lot of stability, but these governments are still partially supported by the EU or European governments. So it really makes you question their role. And this is actually what you ended your presentation with, if I could remember correctly. You said, how sure can we be that the EU doesn't support extractive political institutions by supporting these governments? So I'd like to ask you, if I may, what, from your point of view, an alternative could be for the EU? What could be done? And something that is usually mentioned in these contexts is support civil society, perhaps. So could that be a solution instead of aiding the government, which is then, yeah, questionable if that makes sense? Could it be better to support civil society, but then is civil society ready to receive such support? What is your view on that?
I will answer this question maybe in 2 parts or 3 parts, might not be directly related, but actually relates. So the first part is that I would want to cite is, I think the problem in the Sahel is with particularly Francophone African or Francophone Sahel countries. And we've seen the conduct of France in the Sahel, and that's where I say that the EU is playing kind of a double standard, because the EU is saying we are democratic, they have democratic values, they have democratic institutions. However, the conduct of France in the Sahel has not been questioned by the EU. And you ask why. I can't answer that as an African. I will leave that to the Europeans to, to think about it. So we have to start from there. We have to be realistic to ask the real questions, like, why is it not happening? Take, for example, in Ghana, it's not that bad in Ghana. Of course, climate change is evident, but when we come to security, it's because of the border countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Chad, and that actually. But in terms of democracy in Ghana, it's far more better off than other countries like Mali and Burkina Faso and Niger, or that we see even in Cameroon. One of such reasons that we are saying is that I say, are we not sure? Because France is sustaining these powers. So actually, over time, there is kind of a, how do I say, kind of a discontent, public discontent about France, especially from young people in Africa about France, and because they believe that they choose the presidents for them, they run the system. So that's what I say, decolonization process has not actually happened in Africa, because it is not about giving people, leaving the institutions with people, but not giving them the freedom to actually take charge or manage those institutions. So those institutions are suffering from colonial legacies, you know. So that is one of they are very colonial in nature. They are suffering from colonial. I will cite Cameroon in one of the examples. I will cite Mali. I will cite Burkina Faso. The other issue that I would want to say is that apart from the fact that the EU is France has a kind of conduct, or these French countries they are really being challenged, is there is something I want to note, is that EU is not in the Sahel or because of the interest of the Sahelians. I always ask myself, why is it EU is there? So EU is there because of the interest. The security of Sahel is the security of the Europeans or the European Union. So that is one thing we need to understand. So the European Union is going to actually address challenges that actually threatens their security than challenges that threaten internal security in those countries that do not concern the Europeans directly. So that is one of the observations that I have got. The other issue is, yes, Germany, I think giving space to civil society is good, but if you give space to civil society without giving them the capacity and the technology on how to do it's not also going to work. So I think that one, I always cite Germany as an example, what the GIZ is doing in the Sahel. GIZ has gone beyond the securitization of Sahel to understand that first you need to give the people the opportunities, building their skills and the capacities in the sectors that are lacking and so on and so forth. So for me, that would be kind of a starting point also to think about it, that yeah, security concerns are important, but there are also issues that are of more importance, like the security concerns, which is building this space for civil society and also giving them the capacity and the technology on how to use it. For example, another problem is when Africans are extractive, they have extractive institutions, but the technology, they don't have the technology. So why is it that crude oil is produced in Africa, but the final product is in Europe because they don't have the machineries to do that, and so on and so forth. So those are the kind of genuine dialogue that I feel that we have to talk about, the kind of things that transfer of skills is very important to give to civil societies, and also push away from this foreign aid ideology where the white saviorism is coming into Africa to say, oh, we want to help the people because I think the people have understood this over time and they are very conscious about what they want, and so it's more about partnership, genuine partnership and dialogue on how we can work together as genuinely as we are, and how we can also address the issues without actually tampering on our personal interests, you know. So for me, that is the thing, because as of now, I don't see how the club of the rich and the club of the poor will sit together to make equal decisions at equal level. That is still something that I don't see. The EU represents the club of the rich, and Africa or political leaders and so on represent the club of the poor. So obviously, when the rich and the poor are there, there will be some kind of power imbalances that will exist. But in as much as if we want inclusive dialogue, we have to keep those terminologies or labels of rich and poor, and then we come together and talk inclusively. That's my opinion.
Right, thanks. So as an extension of the previous question, and maybe directly continuing from what you were just saying, can Western countries or the international community stop supporting illegitimate and repressive regimes without risking a large humanitarian cost? So could the situation of local people become worse if this support is stopped for political reasons?
Yeah, I think that it's a yes and it's a no, because realistically, I think that will be the best solution actually, to stop financing the politicians, because we know that when the money is given to them, they use it for their personal issues, that is to either consolidate or sustain power, or so also clamp down on people that they consider as threats to their sovereignty and also power struggle kind of things. And so for me, I would say yes in the sense that more, like I mentioned, they should focus on the local people and the local communities or the civil societies and so on and so forth. But where I say they know which is going to be complicated is that these institutions actually provide the policies through which foreign investment and all those things come from. So it's complicated, but I think that that is something that the EU can look at beyond just giving money to governments, look at ways in which they can work this out. That is what I will recommend. It's a complicated, I would say it's a very complicated situation, or to say no, don't give. And but that would be, if you want to ask my personal opinion, realistically, I would say that would be the best solution. But I don't see how that is possible, because if EU wants to remain a strategic actor of Africa, then certain issues have to be reconsidered. Business must not be as usual. Business must actually change, because I think that there is often this saying in Africa that African countries are corrupt, but I also at times ask myself, who corrupts these corrupt institutions? So we've seen cases where the conduct of Shell, ExxonMobil, these huge companies, what they do in Africa, it's unbelievable. They function without any corporate social responsibility. The highest level of degradation and environmental pollution is conducted by these companies or private institutions from Europe. So when we talk about corruption, is it only the Africans that are corrupting? No, I think Europe is, these institutions come and they corrupt the authorities. One of the reasons is because they lack the capacity. There is no rule of law. There are no strong institutions. There are no strong laws, that can. So those are the things that we have to consider. Before you point in my local, there is a saying in my local language that before you point a finger to somebody, be careful, because 4 actually of those fingers are pointing back at you. So that will be a takeaway for the Europeans.
Yeah, that is a very good point. And just today, I read in the German news that a foreign company was buying land of Kenyan farmers. So basically, this is a continuation of the decade or more old discussion of the land grabbing problems. And it was saying that they were paying the farmers, they were paying them well. They were paying €3 for a cashew tree. And that's exactly the amount of money that a bag of cashews costs in a supermarket here in Bonn. So it is ridiculous to say that this is a fair payment. That problem is certainly ubiquitous, and business cannot be as usual. That is something that I take from this lecture for sure. We are slowly coming to an end, I think, with a look at the time. I have 2 more questions on the chat for you. One of them, I'm not sure I understand it correctly, but perhaps you will make more sense of it. It says, so Kudakwashe is saying that I'm sure that most of the Sahel political elites are good at coup proofing. For instance, why is Cameroon more peaceful than Burkina Faso? So perhaps you can explain, or perhaps Kudakwashe can explain what is meant by coup proofing, but perhaps you also just want to take that question as it is.
That's a very interesting question from the participant, honestly, why Cameroon is more peaceful than Burkina Faso. I don't think that Cameroon is more peaceful than Burkina Faso. I think what is seen in Cameroon is kind of a relative peace, like over the years, there have been that misconception that Cameroon is more peaceful than many other countries, although it's surrounded in a very turbulent area like Central Africa and so on, the Lake Chad, but I don't think, if we look at the current settings in Cameroon, you will see that it hasn't happened in Cameroon because of one key issue, which I'm talking about, these extractive institutions. Like the political actors have built kind of an empire where they actually share rents, you know, among their friends and also cabinets and so on and so forth. So this is done through awarding appointments, ministerial appointments to top elites or people they consider friends and so on and so forth. Also, for example, the other thing is the military. The military is very ethnic military. So the military is has been able to sustain power for the regime, because the military is allowed to be what we call business military. They do business, which is something that normally military people are not supposed to be. They are inserted into very strategic institutions in the country. For example, like where the petroleum and oil sector is, they allow them to get rents freely. So some of them become general managers and so executive boards and so on and so forth. So I think that the model in Cameroon, and then also the aspect of the French, there is a common, I don't know how true this is or how academic this is, but it's kind of a realistic or public opinion that because the elite is also, the elites are giving back to the colonial masters, makes them stay longer in power, keeps them longer in power than the other countries like Burkina Faso and Chad and Mali. So the case in Cameroon, it would surely happen. It hasn't happened doesn't mean that everything is well, because it's the country is at the crossroad of collapse. Actually, that's my personal opinion. But however, the model, the style, the system, the extractive political institutions understand the art of what coup-proofing is, you know, that art of what it means to appease your how do you call it, appease your friends and your clients and so on, and then also clamp down on the opposition. For example, we've seen cases in Cameroon where people that had spoken so badly of the government, they were given positions, and then immediately they gave them positions, they come into power, they like become a minister, and then you also get your own rents by accumulating wealth from the institutions, and then after they label you to say, oh, fines against corruption and so on, and most of these political leaders are lifetime in jail. So the art of coup-proofing is very, very strategic in Cameroon. That is what I would say, but it doesn't mean that it seems better than in Burkina Faso and other parts of Africa.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I have one last question, which is, what could persons like you, Africans who have studied in Germany, for example, do to improve the situation and help against destructive elites? Now, I am not sure if we should bring this to the individual level. I'm not sure that is the best way to do it, but I would like to say you, in fact, are doing a lot to help, because you are doing excellent research on this topic. You are giving informative talks about this, thus sharing your knowledge and allowing us to learn from your insights. So I think that would, for me, answer the question. I would like to thank you for doing that, actually. As I said, I've certainly learned a lot, and yeah, it's always good to question one's own preconceived ideas, and business cannot remain as usual. This is what we take from this lecture. So I would like to give you an opportunity for some last remarks, either to address this question that I just mentioned, or just any other thoughts that you might have, and otherwise we would slowly come to an end. And again, thank you very much for sharing your knowledge with us.
Yeah, so actually what I will say is my contribution is, I will answer half part of it is that my contribution will be, or not only me, but as Africans, that Europe should work with African scientists or researchers, yeah, And I think this is a very good opportunity. I'm citing Cassis for giving me this opportunity to share my perspective as an African expert. And that is what Cassis has done to strengthen this kind of collaboration, bring more of the Afrocentric perspective rather than the Eurocentric perspective, and try to blend both of it. I think that is what I can do, or what I have been doing so far within this framework of the Bonn SDG lecture. And my last remark is that I still insist on the fact that it is significant to reach a common ground in Africa. It is very important for Europeans and European Union in particular, to learn from Africa or from Africans, to listen from Africans and also cooperate with Africans, but not about Africans. So that is going to be my closing remark, that there is need to learn, there is need to listen, and there is the need to cooperate.
Thank you very much. That is an excellent closing remark, and it's also for me inspiring to hear that, because that is what we are trying to do at the Development and Peace Foundation, at the SAF as well, to make voices from the so-called Global South heard in Germany and in Europe. And that's also what we're doing with the Potsdam Spring Dialogues, where we are inviting a lot of African scientists, political representatives, and civil society to discuss, also with German politicians and academics. So this is also what the Cassis is doing in this instance. So thank you very much to the organizers and to the hosts. And most of all, thank you very much to you, Maria, for sharing your insights with us. It's great to have you here in Bonn as a researcher, and it's great that we were able to listen to you today. Thank you very much again to all participants. Thanks for joining us tonight, and hopefully see you again soon, perhaps here online on the Cassis channel, or maybe at an event at the University of Bonn or elsewhere. Thank you very much all, and have a great rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.